Nobody wanted to sit next to the human. The hiring board at Caldera Station had posted her assignment 3 days ago, and every crew member on the Windfall had read it, laughed about it, and moved on with their lives. A human cultural liaison, mandated by the Frontier Trade Authority, required for any cargo vessel running supply routes through mixed species zones. It was the kind of regulation that made experienced spacers roll their eyes and pour another drink. Renasato arrived at Docking Bay 14 with a single bag over her shoulder and a calm expression on her face. She was not tall by galactic standards. She was not armored, not clawed, not covered in protective scales. She looked, by every measurable standard the crew could think of, completely ordinary. Captain Dorvan met her at the airlock. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his forearms folded across his broad chest, his gray skin reflecting the overhead lights. He was Mirati, and the Mirati did not waste time on politeness when they felt it was undeserved. "You are the liaison," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Rena said. "Permission to come aboard." Dorvan stared at her for a long moment, then stepped aside without a word. The Windfall was a mid-range cargo hauler. It was not pretty, it was not fast, and it smelled like engine coolant and old food. But it ran, and it paid, and the crew had been together long enough to develop the kind of bond that made outsiders feel unwelcome. Grun was the first to make his feelings known. He was Palashi, a reptilian species built like a small mountain. His scales were dark green. His teeth were visible even when his mouth was closed, and his voice carried across every room he entered. "This is the human," he said, looking Rena up and down as she entered the mess hall. "I thought they would send something bigger." Laughter rippled through the room. A few crew members glanced at Rena to see her reaction. She set her bag on the nearest table and said, "I get that a lot." Grun grinned. "Soft walkers," he said to the crew member beside him, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They bruise if you look at them wrong, and they sleep for a third of their lives." A third? Can you imagine being that useless? More laughter. Rena did not respond. She picked up her bag and looked at Dorvan, who pointed toward a narrow hallway at the back of the ship. "Cabin 7, he said. "Smallest one we have. It is all that is available." "That is fine," Rena said, and walked away without looking back. Fail watched her go. He was Chivery, an insectoid species with long, thin limbs and large multifaceted eyes that caught every detail. He was the ship's navigator, and he was nervous about most things, but something about the way the human carried herself made him more nervous than usual. She did not react. He said quietly to Tilla, the ship's medic. Tilla was Resari, amphibian, soft-spoken, with smooth blue-gray skin and eyes that never seemed to blink. She watched the hallway where Rena had disappeared and said nothing for a moment. "No," Tilla finally said. She did not. Over the next 2 days, the Windfall undocked from Caldera Station and set course for the Veshan corridor. Rena stayed out of the way. She learned the ship's layout on her own, memorized the cargo manifest without being asked, and studied the communication protocols for every species they were likely to encounter on the frontier. Nobody helped her. Nobody offered. Grun continued to make jokes at her expense during meals, and the rest of the crew either laughed along or stayed silent. Dorvan treated her with the bare minimum of professionalism and nothing more. Rena ate alone. She worked alone. She asked no questions and made no complaints that on the second night, Fail could not sleep. His species required very little rest, so he often wandered the ship during the quiet hours. He found himself passing the observation bay and stopped when he saw a figure standing at the window. It was Rena. She stood with her hands at her sides, looking out at the stars. The light from a distant nebula painted her face in shades of blue and violet. She did not notice him at first, and Fail almost turned away. Then he saw her hand. She was flexing it open and closed, slowly, deliberately. Each time her fingers closed into a fist, the tendons in her forearm stood out like steel cables under her skin. Each time she opened it, the movement was smooth and controlled, like something mechanical. Fail had seen Palashi crack metal with their tails. He had seen Mirati bend structural beams with their forearms. But something about the quiet, controlled power in that simple human gesture made his antennae flatten against his head. He backed away without making a sound and returned to his quarters. In the mess hall the next morning, Grun was telling another joke about humans. Something about how they needed water every few hours or they would die. The crew laughed. Rena sat in the corner, eating her meal in silence, and if the laughter bothered her, she gave no sign of it. But Fail was not laughing. He was watching her hand as she held her spoon, and he was thinking about what he had seen in the observation bay. And for the first time since she had come aboard, he wondered if maybe the crew was not laughing at the right person. 3 cargo disputes in 2 weeks, and Rena solved all of them without raising her voice. The first was at Way Station Oral, where a pair of Drenathy merchants had refused to release a shipment of medical supplies because of a billing error. Dorvin had been ready to walk away from the deal entirely. Rena asked for 5 minutes. She sat across from the 2 merchants, studied their posture, listened to the specific way they phrased their complaints, and within 4 minutes had identified that the real issue was not the bill, but a perceived insult from the station clerk who had processed the order. She apologized on the station's behalf, offered a minor concession on the delivery timeline, and the merchants released the shipment with smiles on their faces. Dorvin said nothing about it afterward, but he stopped assigning her meaningless busy work. The second dispute was between a Mirati freight captain and a Chivery dock supervisor, who were one wrong word away from a physical confrontation. Rena stepped between them, which was something no crew member on the Windfall would have dared to do, and redirected the conversation so smoothly that both parties walked away thinking they had won. The third was a tense standoff over a contaminated water shipment. Rena read the room, identified the nervous party, and quietly offered them an exit that saved face. Done in 6 minutes. Grun watched that last one from across the loading bay. He did not make a joke afterward. He just shook his head and muttered, "Lucky," and went back to his work, but Fail was paying closer attention that IT started one evening in the mess hall. Rena was eating alone, as usual, and Fail sat down across from her with his tray. She looked up, surprised but not unfriendly. "I have a question," Fail said, "about your planet." Rena leaned back. "Go ahead. What is it like?" "Earth. I have read the basic data files, but they are very dry." Rena thought for a moment. "It depends on where you are. Some parts are frozen solid for most of the year. Some parts are so hot that the ground can burn through your shoes. We have oceans that cover most of the surface, storms that flatten entire cities, and earthquakes that split the ground open without warning." Fail's antennae pulled back. "That sounds hostile." "It is." "And you live there?" "Willingly." "We evolved there," Rena said. "We did not have a choice at first. But yes, we stayed. We built cities in every climate. Deserts, mountains, frozen tundra, volcanic islands. If there's ground to stand on, humans have probably built something on it." Phil was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "What kind of predators does your world have?" Rena smiled slightly. "A lot. Big cats, bears, wolves, sharks, venomous snakes, crocodiles. But the most effective predator on Earth is us. Humans. We are persistence predators. We are not the fastest, not the strongest, not the most armored. But we can chase prey for hours. Most animals on Earth sprint fast and then stop. Humans just keep going. We sweat to cool ourselves so we do not overheat. We tracked animals across open plains until they collapsed from exhaustion, and then we killed them." Fail stared at her. "You ran things to death." "Basically, yes." "That is horrifying." Rena shrugged. "It worked." Fail glanced around the mess hall. The rest of the crew was scattered at their usual tables. Grun was arguing with someone about engine calibration. Nobody was paying attention to their conversation. "What about injuries?" Fail asked. "I read that humans can heal from broken bones." "We can. It takes a few weeks, depending on the bone, but it grows back together. We can also survive losing quite a lot of blood, recover from burns, and fight through pain that would shut down the nervous system of most species I have read about in the Galactic database." Fail's large eyes blinked slowly. "You read the Galactic Species database?" "I read everything on this ship," Rena said simply. "There is not much else to do when nobody talks to you." That landed differently than she probably intended. Fail looked down at his tray and felt something he did not expect. "Shame." "I am sorry," he said. for how the crew has treated you." Rena waved it off. "I have dealt with worse. Humans are used to being underestimated. It is actually one of our advantages." Fail wanted to ask what she meant by that, but the ship's alert chime interrupted them. A routine health scan, mandatory for all crew members before entering the Greymon Nebula. Everyone filed toward the medical bay to register their bio readings. Tilla processed each crew member efficiently. When Rena's turn came, the medic pressed the scanner to her arm and waited. The device hummed longer than usual. Tilla frowned at the readout, tapped the screen twice, and then stared at it in silence. "Problem?" Rena asked. "No," Tilla said, her voice perfectly neutral. "You are clear." Rena nodded and left. Tilla watched her go, then looked at the scanner readout again. Her pupils dilated, which for a res-sorry was the equivalent of a human going pale. She saved the file, locked it under her personal access code, and said nothing to anyone. That night, Fail lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. He thought about persistence predators. He thought about a species that chased things until they died. He thought about a woman who sat in a room full of people who mocked her every day and never once lost her patience. And he thought about the fact that maybe patience and persistence were the same thing. The Greymon Nebula had a reputation, and none of it was good. Signal interference turned communications into static. Navigation became guesswork, and the dense clouds of charged particles that drifted through the region made long-range scanners almost useless. It was the kind of space where bad things happened to good ships, and Dorvin had no intention of staying longer than necessary. He ordered a full diagnostic sweep of every system on the Windfall before they pushed deeper. Engines, shields, life support, weapons, and the standard bioscanner protocol that cataloged every living thing on board. It was routine. Every captain did it before entering high-risk space. It was nothing anyone thought twice about. Until Tilla called a meeting, she did it quietly. No ship-wide announcement, no alarm. She simply walked to the mess hall during the evening meal, set a data pad on the table in front of Dorvin, and said, "You need to see this." Dorvin picked up the pad. Grun leaned over to look. Fail stood nearby. His antennae twitching on the screen was the bioscanner report from the previous day. Every crew member was listed with their species classification, health status, and a standard galactic threat and capability rating. Most of the crew fell into normal categories. Mirati were listed as high-capability biped. Palashi were heavy-class reptilian. Chivri were low-threat insectoid. Res-Sari were moderate adaptive amphibian. And then there was Rena. Species, Homo sapiens. Classification, dominant life form. Grun snorted. "The scanner is broken." "It is not broken," Tilla said. She took the pad from Dorvin and expanded the full report. "I checked the data 3 times. I cross-referenced it with the Galactic Species Archive. The classification is accurate." She began reading the data out loud. Bone density, higher than 70% of known bipedal species. Muscle-to-mass ratio, in the top 15% of all cataloged sapient life. Adrenaline response system, capable of temporary strength and speed increases of up to 40% above baseline in crisis situations. Binocular forward-facing vision, predator classification. Omnivorous digestive system, capable of processing nearly any organic matter. Healing factor, able to recover from fractures, deep tissue damage, and moderate blood loss without surgical intervention. Endurance index, among the highest ever recorded for any species in the galactic database. The mess hall had gone silent. Pain tolerance, Tilla continued, her voice steady but quieter now. Humans can remain conscious and functional through levels of physical trauma that would cause neurological shutdown in most galactic species. Their bodies produce natural painkillers during extreme stress. They can fight, run, and make rational decisions while severely injured. Grin's grin was gone. "That cannot be right." "It is right," Tilla said. "The dominant life form classification is not given to species that are simply intelligent or social. It is reserved for apex ecosystem controllers on worlds rated class 7 or above on the habitability danger scale. Earth is rated class 12. Fail's antennae went flat against the skull. 12? The scale only goes to 15. Correct, Tilla said. Earth has active tectonic plates, extreme weather systems, high UV radiation, a molten core that generates unpredictable magnetic shifts, and a biosphere so competitive that 99% of all species that have ever existed on that planet are extinct. Humans are what survived. Dorvin had not spoken. He sat with all four arms resting on the table, his gray face unreadable. He stared at the report as if he was reading it for the 10th time and still did not believe it. "Where is she now?" he asked. Tilla checked the internal sensors. "Cargo Bay 2. Dorvin pulled up the cargo bay camera on the mess hall display. The screen flickered to life and showed the wide, dimly lit bay where the Windfall stored its heavier freight. Rena was in the far corner. She had found one of the structural support beams, a thick bar of reinforced alloy that ran from floor to ceiling. She was hanging from it by her hands, pulling herself up and lowering herself back down in a slow, controlled rhythm. Pull-ups, over and over, in the ship's standard gravity, which was set to Mirati comfort levels and was heavier than what most species preferred. She was not struggling. She was not straining. She was just doing it, the same way someone else might stretch before bed. Grun stared at the screen. His jaw was open slightly, showing his teeth, but for once he had nothing to say. Fail was the one who broke the silence. "We have been making fun of an apex predator to her face," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And she just smiled at us." Nobody laughed. Dorvin closed the display and stood up. He looked at Tilla. "Does she know about this report?" "I do not think so," Tilla said. "She has not accessed any of the bioscanner files." "Good," Dorvin said. Then he paused, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear exactly. Something closer to the expression a person makes when they realize they have been standing next to a loaded weapon and treating it like a piece of furniture. He picked up the datapad, looked at the dominant lifeform classification one more time, and set it back on the table without a word. Grun was the last to leave the mess hall. He stopped at the door, looked back at the blank display where the cargo bay feed had been, and for the first time since Rena had boarded the Windfall, he did not have a joke that he did not have anything at all. The lights went red before anyone had time to think. Point 3 ships dropped out of warp less than 200 meters off the Windfall's port side. They were small, angular, built for speed and violence. Skarn Raiders. Their hulls were painted with kill markings, dozens of them, each one representing a ship they had taken. The first shot hit the Windfall's engine array and killed the main drive instantly. The second took out the long-range communication antenna. The third was a warning shot across the bow, close enough to shake the walls. Dorvin reached the bridge in under a minute. His 4 hands moved across the controls, trying to find something, anything, that still worked. Shields were at 30%. Weapons were offline. The backup engine would take 20 minutes to spool up, and they did not have 20 minutes. "They are hailing us," Fail said from the navigation console, his voice thin with fear. The Skarn message was short. "Surrender the ship and its cargo. The crew would be taken alive. Resistance would not be tolerated." Dorvin knew what "taken alive" meant when the Skarn said it. It meant sold. It meant labor camps on dead moons where the average survival time was measured in months. "We fall back to the engine room," Dorvin said. "We negotiate. Maybe we can offer the cargo, and they let us go." "They will not let us go." The voice came from the back of the bridge. Rena stood in the doorway, her arms at her sides, her face completely calm. "I have dealt with Skarn before. Negotiation is not something they do. If we open that airlock, everyone on the ship is dead or worse." Dorvin turned to face her. "Then what do you suggest?" "We have no weapons, no engines, and no way to call for help." Rena looked at him steadily. "You have me." Before Dorvin could respond, the ship shuddered. A deep, metallic groan echoed through the hull. The Skarn were cutting through the port airlock. Rena moved. She did not run. She did not panic. She walked to the emergency supply locker near the bridge, pulled it open, and took out a fire suppression rod, a heavy metal tool about 3 feet long, designed to pry open jam panels during emergencies. She tested its weight in her hand, swung it once, and headed for the port corridor. "Lock every door behind me," she said over her shoulder. and keep the crew in the engine room. The port airlock blew inward, and 6 Scarran poured through the breach. They were tall, armored in natural bone plating that covered their chests and arms. Their eyes were black and wet, built for low light. Each one carried a serrated blade in one hand and a pulse weapon in the other. Rena was waiting around the first corner. The lead Scarran never saw her. She swung the rod into the side of his knee joint, the one gap in the bone plating, and he went down with a sound like cracking wood. Before the second could raise his weapon, she had already triggered the emergency bulkhead behind the first two, cutting the group in half. Point two on her side. For on the other, the corridor was narrow, too narrow for the Scarran to use their size advantage. Rena had memorized the ship's layout in her first week aboard. She knew every door, every junction, every emergency control. The second Scarran lunged at her. She stepped sideways, let his blade pass within an inch of her ribs, and brought the rod down on his weapon arm. The pulse gun clattered to the floor. She kicked it behind her and hit him again, this time across the face. He stumbled. She hit him a third time. He fell on the other side of the bulkhead. The remaining 4 Scarran were cutting through. Rena did not wait. She moved deeper into the ship, drawing them after her, into the low-gravity maintenance section near the cargo bays. The gravity dropped to half standard. The Scarran were fast in normal conditions, but in low gravity, their heavy frames became clumsy. They bounced off walls, misjudged distances, swung too hard, and threw themselves off balance. Rena did not have that problem. She adjusted instantly, using the walls and ceiling to redirect herself, staying low, staying fast, hitting hard, and moving before they could recover. Point one of them caught her across the ribs with a backhand blow that would have killed a Chivery outright. She heard something crack. Pain exploded through her left side. She staggered, caught herself on a support strut, and kept moving. Gruen was watching from the engine room security feed. He saw the blow land. He saw Rena double over for exactly 3 seconds. Then he saw her straighten up, shift the rod to her other hand, and close the distance again. "What is she?" he whispered. She used the ship against them. Emergency doors to separate. Gravity controls to disorient. Narrow passages to limit their numbers. She fought like something that had spent 200,000 years learning how to kill things bigger and stronger than itself. Because that was exactly what she was. By the time it was over, for Scarran on the floor. The remaining 2 looked at each other, looked at the human standing in the corridor with blood running down her arm and a broken fire suppression rod in her fist, and they ran. They ran back to their ship, and they left. Rena stood in the corridor, breathing hard, ribs grinding with every inhale. She looked up at the security camera, and through the blood and the sweat and the pain, she said 6 words. "Tell the captain they're not getting this ship." In the engine room, nobody spoke. Gruen's claws were dug into the console in front of him. Fail's antennae were pressed flat. Tilla's hands were shaking. And Dorvin, for the first time in 20 years of captaining ships through the worst space in the frontier, did not have a single order to give. Tilla found her sitting on the floor of the corridor with her back against the wall. The Scarran ships had disengaged and jumped to warp within minutes of their raiders retreating. The Windfall was damaged but intact. The backup engine was coming online. Life support was stable. Everyone was alive. Everyone, including the human who had 2 cracked ribs, a deep laceration running from her left elbow to her wrist, and bruising so severe across her shoulders and back that the skin had already turned dark purple. Tilla knelt beside her and opened her medical kit without a word. Rena did not protest. She just sat there, breathing in short, careful breaths, and let the medic work. "The crew," Rena said after a moment. "Is anyone hurt?" Tilla paused. She looked at the woman in front of her, the one who was bleeding from 3 places and had bones grinding inside her chest, and felt something she had not expected. It was not pity. It was not admiration. It was the sudden, overwhelming realization that she had completely misjudged another living being. "The crew is fine," Tilla said quietly. "Because of you." Rena nodded and said nothing else. Tilla applied a bonding gel to the arm wound, wrapped it tightly, and used a portable stabilizer on the cracked ribs. Human bones would heal on their own. The scanner data had confirmed that, but they needed to be held in place while they did. You should not have been able to stay conscious after that hit to your ribs, Tillis said. Probably not, Rena agreed. Your species produces natural analgesics during extreme stress. Your adrenaline system allows you to override pain signals temporarily. I read the data, but seeing it in person is... Tillis searched for the word. Terrifying, Rena offered. I was going to say remarkable, Tillis said. But yes, also terrifying. The medbay door opened 20 minutes later, and Grun stood in the doorway. He was massive, nearly filling the frame, and for the first time since Rena had known him, he looked uncertain. His tail hung low. His claws were retracted. He stood there for a long, uncomfortable silence, and then he walked in and sat down on the bench across from her. He did not look at her injuries. He looked at her face. I owe you my life, he said. His voice was low, stripped of the usual bluster. Every person on this ship owes you their life, and I owe you an apology for every stupid thing I have said since you came aboard. Rena studied him for a moment. Then she said, Accepted. Grun blinked. That is it. Just accepted. What else would it be? You were wrong. Now you know. Holding it over you does not help anyone. Grun opened his mouth, closed it, and then did something Rena had never seen a Palashi do. He lowered his head, just slightly, in a gesture of respect that his species reserved for those they considered equals. Then he stood up and left without another word. Dorvin came next. He entered the med bay with all four arms clasped behind his back, a posture that Rena had learned meant he was thinking carefully about what he was going to say. He stood at the foot of her bed and looked at the bandages, the stabilizer on her ribs, the bruising that was visible above the collar of her shirt. I am reassigning your quarters, he said. Second largest cabin on the ship. And your role designation is being updated to senior crew, security, and liaison. Rena raised an eyebrow. Is that an apology? It is a correction, Dorvin said. And then, after a pause that lasted just long enough to mean something, he added, thank you. He left. Rena leaned back against her pillow and allowed herself to close her eyes. Fail was the last to visit. He came in carrying a tray of food, something warm that smelled like the spiced grain porridge that Chivri favored. He set it on the table beside her and sat down. I looked up more about your planet, he said. After our conversation, I found historical records. Wars that lasted decades. Plagues that killed millions. Ice ages. Asteroid impacts. Mass extinction events. We have had a rough few 100,000 years, Rena said. You survived all of it. We did. Fail's antennae twitched. Ow! Rena opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. With the kind of direct, steady gaze that predator species used, but that most prey species found deeply unsettling. Fail did not look away. We are stubborn, Rena said, and we look out for each other. That is really all it is. Fail was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think that is more than enough. That evening, for the first time since Rena had boarded the Windfall, the crew ate together. All of them, at one table. Rena sat between Fail and Grun, eating slowly because deep breaths still hurt, and nobody made a joke about humans or soft walkers or species that needed too much sleep. The bioscanner report was still displayed on the mess hall wall screen. Someone had pulled it up earlier, and nobody had thought to close it. The words dominant life form glowed in standard blue text beside Rena's name. Nobody laughed at it anymore. And when Rena finally excused herself to rest, Grun watched her walk down the corridor toward her new quarters, the bigger ones, the ones she had earned. Dominant life form, he said under his breath, not as a joke, not as a question, just as a fact. 6 months changed everything and nothing at the same time. The Windfall still ran the same routes through frontier space. The engines still rattled when the ship pushed past cruising speed. The mess hall still smelled like whatever Gruen had burned for breakfast. The work was the same, the dangers were the same, and the pay was still barely enough to keep everyone fed between stops. But the crew was different. And the reason was sitting in the second largest cabin on the ship, reading a technical manual on Scaran raiding tactics, because Renasato did not believe in being caught off guard twice. Word had spread. That was the thing about the frontier. News traveled through docking bays and way stations like fire through dry grass. A human had fought off a Scarn boarding party on a cargo hauler with nothing but a fire suppression rod and the kind of stubbornness that most species could not even understand. The Windfall, a ship that most pirates would have considered an easy target, was suddenly a vessel that raiders gave a wide pass. Dorvin never said it out loud, but his ship had not been threatened once since the incident. Not once in 6 months. He credited good luck and favorable routes. Everyone else credited the human. When the Windfall docked at Caldera Station for its regular resupply, Rena found a message waiting for her. The Frontier Trade Authority was offering her a transfer. A larger ship, a more prestigious posting, a crew that had specifically requested a human liaison after hearing about what had happened in the Greymon Nebula. Better pay, better quarters. A real security role, not a tacked-on afterthought. She read the message twice and set her data pad on the table. Dorvin found her in the observation bay an hour later. She was standing at the window, looking out at the station, her hands loose at her sides. "I heard about the offer," he said. "News travels fast. It is a good posting. Better ship, better crew. You will be valued there." Rena turned to look at him. "I am valued here." Dorvin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the most careful voice she had ever heard from a Mirati, "The decision is yours. I will not stop you." But his lower left hand, the one closest to her, twitched slightly. Rena had spent 6 months learning how the Mirati expressed emotions they were too proud to say out loud. That twitch meant more than any words he could have offered. "I will think about it," she said. She did not have to think long. Gruen found her in the cargo bay that afternoon, because Gruen always found people in the cargo bay. He leaned against a stack of supply crates and crossed his massive arms over his chest. "I heard you might leave," he said. "I might. That would be stupid." Rena raised an eyebrow. "That is your argument for me to stay?" Gruen shifted his weight, and something in his expression softened. It was not a look she had ever expected to see on a Palashi face. "This ship is not the same without someone who can punch a Scarn in the face and then ask about dinner," he said. Then, quieter, "It is not the same without you." Fail came to her cabin that evening. He was carrying something small and flat, wrapped in a piece of cloth. He set it on her desk and stepped back. "What is this?" Rena asked. "Open it." She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a hand-drawn star chart, detailed and precise, made on a thin sheet of navigational film. Every system they had traveled through together was marked. Every way station, every nebula, every jump point. In the corner, in tiny Chivery script that Rena had learned to read months ago, were 2 words: "Safe travels." "I made it myself," Fail said. "In case you go, so you remember the route home." Rena looked at the chart for a long time. Then she looked at Fail. "You are the first person on this ship who made me feel like I was not alone," she said. Fail's antennae lifted. "You made me feel brave. I think that is a fair trade." Tilla was the last. She found Rena in the med bay, which was fitting since that was where most of their honest conversations had happened. She did not sit down. She just stood in the doorway and said what she needed to say. "You kept us alive. That matters. Whatever you decide, that does not change." Rena turned down the transfer the next morning. The Windfall's crew manifest was updated that afternoon. Senior crew, security, and liaison, Rena Sato. Species, Homo sapiens. Classification, dominant life form. 2 days later, a new crew member boarded the ship. He was young, barely old enough to hold a frontier work permit, with wide orange eyes and thin, feathered arms that marked him as Savari. He had never been off his homeworld before, and everything about the Windfall amazed and frightened him in equal measure that he noticed Rena immediately. She was sitting at the mess hall table, eating a bowl of grain porridge and reading something on her datapad. She looked ordinary, unremarkable, small by galactic standards. The young Savari turned to Gruen, who was sitting nearby. "What species is she?" he asked. Gruen looked at Rena. He watched her turn a page, take a bite of her food, and glance up at the new crew member with a small, polite smile. Then Gruen looked back at the young Savari, and without a trace of humor, without a hint of mockery, he said, "Dominant life form." "Trust me," Rena smiled. And the Windfall undocked from Caldera Station, turned its nose toward the frontier, and carried its crew back into the dark between the stars, whole, together, and watched over by the quiet woman in the observation bay who looked out at the universe like it belonged to her. Because in a way, it did.